What's up, BookTube? It's Leah Cooper, and today I am bringing you the top 5 most disappointing things I read in 2020. Quick channel disclaimer, mind you, just a quick channel disclaimer that I do not currently monetize this channel, so feel free to run ad blocker and save yourself the headache of having to sit through whatever ads get placed on this video. I don't have any control over it, and fuck YouTube. Now let's talk about some books. For anyone who has been on Twitter this past week, you've probably heard a hint of the discourse around disappointing book lists and how we shouldn't be doing disappointing book lists or even giving negative reviews because they hurt authors' feelings. And I think I made myself pretty clear about where I stand on this on Twitter, and I think this video is evidence of where I stand. Reviews are for readers. Readers are consumers in some way or another, unless they're pirating, which I also don't agree with. They're paying for a product, which is a book. You know, like books aren't fan fiction. Like the conversation around critical reviews and critical comments on fan fiction, very different conversations, because at the end of the day, readers are in some way paying for the book, and they have a right both to make an informed purchasing decision and also to give their opinion on the thing that they spent money on. And so reviews are for readers, and videos like this are for readers to make an informed decision about what they want to read. And also, frankly, this video is just for me. It's like my personal journal of me reflecting on what I read in the past year, and I have the right to talk about whatever the hell I want. And if it's a top 5 most disappointing reads of the year, well, I spent my time and my money on that, and I'm going to talk about it. It's really simple. And anything negative of a creative project that you've created as an artist, that can be harmful, that can be hurtful. I would never tag authors in reviews. That's also my policy. But like, if you as an author can't handle negative reviews, don't read them, because they're not for you. There's nothing, generally speaking, you can do about it, right? Stop telling people to stop doing reviews or to stop consuming media critically. It's fine. Okay. Let's get on to me complaining about a few things that I read. And I do make a distinction in my top 5, bottom 5, that this is the most disappointing reads. These aren't necessarily like technically the worst written things I've read this year. There's definitely, I scrolled through, I keep a spreadsheet, I look through my Goodreads. There's definitely things I read this past year that were worse, like on a kind of like more of an objective technical level, definitely. And they're not going to appear in this video because, like, frankly, I didn't have very high expectations of them, and they didn't surpass my expectation, and like, that's fine too. So disappointing reads, I think, also for me, and how I do this every year, is there's an element of I expected more from this book and it didn't deliver on that, and so it's disappointing. And also there might be like technical reasons why I didn't love the book. I think I'm kind of gonna go from least disappointing to most disappointing, but it's not a hard and fast rule, except for this first one. This number 5 is definitely like not as disappointing as a lot of the other things on this list. That's going to be Dragon Pearl by Yoon-Ha Lee. And the reason this is on this list is because the Machineries of Empire series is like one of my favorite trilogies. Nine Fox Gambit is like easily on a top 10 list. I read that book several years ago now. 3 years ago? 4 years ago? I think it was back in 2017. And I still love that book so much. And so I expected a lot from Dragon Pearl, and it didn't work for me. I do have a combined review of all the middle grade books that I read this year for the BookTube SF Awards, including Dragon Pearl, and I talk about it at pretty long length, and I kind of talk about the things that didn't work for me: plot, character growth. Those were the main things. So I will link that video up in the cards if you're interested in hearing more of my thoughts. The next one I'm going to mention is one of the first books I read this year, and that is The Emperor's Edge by Lindsay Buroker. And again, this is on this list because I went into it wanting to love it, and it was a struggle to get through. So this is Buroker's debut novel, and I think it's really obvious that it's her debut novel. I read another one of her books, Balanced on the Blade's Edge. I read that several years ago, and while that is a flawed book, it was entertaining. It was fun, and that's all I wanted from this book as well. It's set in a secondary world fantasy. It kind of has some steampunk elements. I don't remember if there's magic, but the whole plot, it's like there's this woman, she's a detective in the police force, and there's an assassin, and there's like a young emperor, and she gets discredited or something in the police force, and she decides to team up with the assassin, and she hatches this insane plan to like discredit. She finds out something that the general or something closest to the emperor is like actually trying to take over the empire for himself or something like that. Again, I read this almost an entire year ago, so it's been a really long time. But so her plot is just, it's dumb. That was my biggest sticking point. She decides to start a counterfeiting ring because she's going to flood the market with counterfeit cash and wreck the economy, and that's how she's going to get rid of this general guy. Like, it's not good. It's very, what the fuck? I had much higher hopes that the plot would at least be coherent, and it wasn't. And yeah, it was a struggle to read. It was one of those, oh god, I just gotta get through it, or it's gonna put me in a reading slump kind of books. I don't remember what I rated this. 2 stars maybe. I definitely wanted to like it more than I ultimately did. There we go. Then the next one is going to be, and this one I actually own in a physical format. The other 2 I read in ebook. So the number 3 is going to be The Death of Mrs Westaway. I talked about this in my recent wrap up. I think I gave it like 2 stars maybe. This is on here because I think it's got like the pieces of a good mystery, but it's so poorly executed. And I had really high hopes for this. This was my first Ruthware. I got this as a gift, birthday gift, from my sister. She didn't pick it out. It came in a random book box, but my sister also loves mysteries, and so I was hoping that I would love this and be able to give it to my sister to read as well, and then we'd be able to talk about it. But it's so bad, I'm not going to waste her time with it. So, and like, the thing is, I think I read the first half of this really quickly. I was really drug into the story. I really wanted to know what was going on. But the thing is, I identified the murderer about this much into the book, and then the author did a lot to try to make me doubt that I knew who the murderer was because it was so obvious. And so I questioned it, and I was like, oh, I guess that can't be it. And so I was willing to suspend disbelief and continue on with it. But then, you know, we get to the end and it's like, oh no, I was right. That is the murderer, which is fine. Except that their motivations were so stupid. Like, so stupid and not well laid out, and just kind of completely from left field. And like the entire climactic fight scene didn't, I feel like, thematically resonate. It was very ham-fisted. Like, it resonates with a couple of like very late in the game added locations that are kind of like supposed, how do I even talk about it? Because like, I don't want to give away the ending, but I hated the entire climactic fight scene. I hate the place where it took place and how that was like, I think, supposed to be emotionally resonant, but it's not. And I just, it's just such a disappointment. I think the payoff in this is not worth it. The last 2 are really vying with one another for whether or not they should be, one or the other should be the most disappointing. But for like number 2, I'm gonna go with Spin the Dawn by Elizabeth Lim, and like its companion book Unravel the Dusk. But frankly, I was so disappointed in Spin the Dawn that Unravel the Dusk wasn't a disappointment, because I didn't go into it thinking it was going to be good. And that's a bummer. So I read Spin the Dawn really early in the year. This is a YA fantasy, and it's pitched as Mulan meets Project Runway. And I had been excited about this book literally since the announcement that it got picked up by a publishing house. I remember seeing the notice about it and thinking, oh, that sounds so cool. And I put it on my Goodreads and I looked forward to it. And I was so excited for it. And I loved the first half. The first half alone could have wound up on my top 5 of the year list. I was talking this book up. I was talking to my friend Jackie about it, and I think Jackie was trying to be nice because she hadn't liked it, and she, looking back, hindsight, I think she was trying to be like, not be like, oh God, the ending's so bad though. Like, I think she was trying not to say that to me because I was so excited about it. I remember talking to people at work about it and being like, oh, this is so good. Because the thing about it is like the Mulan Project Runway aspect, the like kind of small glimpse of like the competition, the crafting competition we get is so good. It's about a girl who disguises herself as her father's son. Her father is a famous tailor, but he has really stopped working as a tailor because of depression, because her mother died and her brothers died in the war. And her father is summoned to compete to become the emperor's next tailor, and he has no hope. So she disguises herself as one of her brothers, the only one left alive, and she goes to the palace to compete. And so that part where she's disguised and she's competing, and we get to see glimpses of the other tailors, that part is so good. It's really interesting, and we get these little glimpses of court intrigue. But the book completely dissolves in the latter third into basically Siege and Storm. She has to go on a journey and find 3 mystical items and also her identity as a woman is revealed very early, and it just completely crumbles and falls apart, and the romance is very, like, I was fine, like, I was willing to go along with the romance until, like, the plot completely dissolved into, what am I reading? Kind of like all of the charming, well thought out, well crafted, well put together pieces of the book disappeared into this, like, very rushed third act that, like, completely veers off into just Siege and Storm, which is not a good book, in my opinion, either. So yeah, it was like such a massive letdown, and the ending was awful. The ending was so bad that I remember getting to the end and going, what? That's a complete contradiction of the first part, and having to reread the opening prologue and going, okay, I guess it doesn't technically contradict itself, but it does not emotionally or thematically land or resonate correctly. And it's just such a bummer. And frankly, I think it's because it reads like a book where the author spent a lot of time on the first half, crafting the first half, rewriting the first half, thinking about it, developing it so that the characters actually develop. And then the third act feels very less polished. And my comment about Unravel the Dusk, which is the sequel, is that entire book feels unpolished. Like, that book feels like it was written very quickly and not developed or reworked or worked on. And I would say that that's especially apparent because just the character growth and the character relations are so completely absent in the second book. There's not a lot of character growth, and there is almost no character interaction, like, between the protagonist and the other characters around her. Almost none. And so it feels like a first draft. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that. I'm just really sad because, like I said, based off the first half of Spin the Dawn, it would have been on my best of list. It was so good. I was loving it so much. And it just shit the landing. Okay. I had to pull this last book out because I own it, and probably no one's going to be surprised that this is making it on this list. So, the number 1 most disappointing thing I read this year, bum, is The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova. So, I talked about this book in some previous wrap-up. This book took freaking, I think, 90-something days for me to read. And it is also, I think, the book that's been on my TBR the longest, maybe? Or it's definitely like the longest thing, like the longest page length book that's been on my TBR the longest. I read Dracula. I reread Dracula last year or the year before. I can't quite remember. And it was like pulling teeth. It had been in my childhood one of my favorite books, but rereading it as an adult, it was pretty insufferable. I did not enjoy it. I did not enjoy that. But I wanted to make sure I reread that before I tackled The Historian, which I've wanted to read The Historian since it came out. I remember when it came out. I remember seeing it at Barnes & Nobles. I always wanted to read it, etc., etc. And I put it on my 20 books to read in 2020 list this year so that I would finally get to it. Because obviously it's like a massive book and it's very intimidating for me. And that's one of the reasons that it's on this list. Not just because of like how it's written, the third act, but also just like the time commitment. It was one of those books that took up so much of my time, and it was such a waste of time. And so it's number one on my most disappointing books list. It kind of is like American Gods in that respect. I think American Gods topped my most disappointing books of 2017 or whatever year I read that. Because again, massive time sink. Had been looking forward to it for a decade and then fucking hated it. Fucking hated every minute of the experience. So, this is a book about a family. It's about a daughter hearing a story from her father of something that happened in his youth with him and her mother, and also what happened to his PhD professor, college professor, and they're all tied. They're all linked to Dracula. So, like, her father's professor one day found a journal that had a dragon in it and Dracula, and it led him to be haunted by Dracula until his eventual death. And her father found a journal with the dragon in it and says Dracul, etc. And it led him on a journey to try to figure out what had happened to his professor, because his professor disappeared. He links up with the protagonist's mother, who is actually the daughter of his professor, and they go looking for the professor, and it's their adventure, and it's a story within a story within a story, and most of the book is alternating chapters between the daughter traveling around Europe in like the 70s with her father, who is an ambassador. I think he works in the ambassador. He's like an ambassadorial corps or something. And them going places and like sitting in cafes and her being like, well, are you going to tell me more of the story, basically? And then the next chapter is him telling more of the damn story. And like the thing about it is like, I think the story that her father's telling is pretty interesting. Like, those chapters were pretty good. But the chapters with her and her father traveling around Europe are so fucking pretentious. It's just Elizabeth Kostova masturbating on the page about, places she's been or places she Google stalked. I don't know. I feel like it has to have been firsthand, just because of the way she's like so in love with the description of these inane little cafes. It really feels like it has to have been like, you know, she went on a summer tour of Europe and wrote a journal. That's how it feels. And like, they were so insufferable. They were so long. They were so needlessly long. And they ground the pace of the book to a halt. This book could be like half the fucking size. And so that's an issue I had with the book. Eventually, the sheer pages devoted to those kinds of sections dwindles as the action picks up in the story that her father's telling her, because it stops being him telling her in person. It becomes like letters, and she's reading them, and so the action is much more direct. And so like the last third of the book, the pace is much better. It's much more palatable. And I was actually starting to like the book. But the final confrontation with Dracula is so anticlimactic. It's like a paragraph. And it's so lame. You get to it after fucking 600 very long pages. And you're just like, really? That's it? You're gonna defeat him in one sentence? Why the fuck did I read 600 pages for that? Like, there was really nothing, there was nothing truly insightful about this book. This book doesn't actually do anything that makes you think. It spends 600 pages, but doesn't actually have any sort of dialogue, or doesn't create a dialogue in the reader. It's really just about Kostova vomiting a lot of pastoral scenes of Europe in the 70s and very full of her own language, which is skilled. Like, she's a deft hand at writing a sentence, but like, she doesn't do anything. She doesn't say a lot. Like, that's profound, that's new, that like makes you think or question or anything. And so with a book of this size, I think that's a wasted opportunity and a waste of the reader's time. I'm literally just holding on to this book. Like, I'm going to keep it on my shelf as like a monument to lost time. And also so I can bitch about it and like hold it up and bitch about it in person if I ever so choose to do so again. Those are my most disappointing books of the year. Again, not necessarily the worst written. I think The Historian has some of the best language of anything I read this year. Like, it's not bad. Like, some of it's pretty damn good. But there's so many other elements, and also it's just like a massive disappointment. Like, you expect a book to be good for 15 years, and then it lets you down by getting rid of Dracula in a sentence. Shit, man. What a weird list. I've got a middle grade fantasy, a self-published fantasy, a contemporary thriller, a historical fiction, speculative historical fiction, and a YA fantasy. So I feel like that really does kind of run the gamut of kind of what I read. It's not like a specific section of of things that I read were disappointments. There are books I read this year that are objectively, I think, worse than some of the things, definitely worse than some of the things I've read. I read a lot of stuff that I would, out of hand, what I would definitely say are worse than like Dragon Pearl. Dragon Pearl doesn't even really probably belong on this list, except that I was personally disappointed in it. And that's why it's showing up here. And that's maybe unfair. But, you know, again, like I also said at the beginning, to some respects, these videos are just a journal for me. And that's how I feel about it. So that, you know, I have kind of a record that I can look back on my reading and see how I felt about things. So I think we're going to call it good on my most disappointing reads. Hopefully you found some of this entertaining. Feel free to disagree with me in the comments, but you're not going to change my opinion, most likely. I mean, you know, hundreds of angry people who have come for me over the American Gods review certainly haven't changed my mind over my opinion about that book over the years. But, you know, feel free to disagree or agree. I don't know. Let me know down below what your most disappointing read was. Kind of think about the parameters that I established. Like, maybe it's not objectively the lowest quality book you read, but like a combination of quality and personal disappointment. What was the most disappointing? Let me know, because I'll be very curious. And I'll see you guys in my next video, which will be my top 5 reads of the year. Much more positive list. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you guys in my next video.